She was forced to marry the beast of the north. They told me I was being sold to a monster. They weren't wrong about the selling part, but the monster wasn't the man waiting at the altar. The wedding dress was beautiful. That was the cruelest part. Alara stood motionless as her stepmother's maid pulled the corset strings tighter, each tug forcing the air from her lungs. The ivory silk gown pooled around her feet like spilled milk, expensive, pristine, purchased with the very money her father had received in exchange for his daughter. Through the cracked mirror, she could see the bruise on her wrist turning purple-black beneath the lace sleeve. Her father's fingers 3 days ago, when she dared to say no. "Stop fidgeting," her stepmother snapped from the doorway, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You should be grateful. Most girls in your position would be thrown into the streets. Most girls' fathers don't gamble away the family fortune and sell their daughters to settle the debt." But Alara didn't say it. She'd learned long ago that speaking only brought more bruises, more locked doors, more days without meals. So she stood silent as a doll while they dressed her for slaughter, preparing her to marry the Duke of Thornwick, the man all of England whispered about in horrified tones. The beast of the north. Oh, astonishing, isn't it? But before we reveal how this incredible moment came to be, I have a question for you. Do you believe that destiny is written in the stars, or do we make it ourselves? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I love reading you stories. Now, settle in, hit that subscribe button to join our family, and let me tell you the truth about what really happened. The morning of Alara Ashford's wedding dawned gray and cold, the London sky pressing down like a granite lid over a tomb. She stood before the tarnished mirror in her childhood bedroom. Though childhood implied warmth, laughter, memories worth keeping, this room held none of those things. Just cold walls and colder silences, punctuated by her father's rages and her stepmother's calculated cruelties. The maid, a nervous girl named Mary, fastened the endless row of pearl buttons running down Alara's spine. Each one felt like a lock clicking into place. "You look beautiful, miss," Mary whispered, though her trembling hands and averted eyes told a different story. The girl had heard the rumors. Everyone had. The beast of the north. The duke who hides his face behind masks. They say he was burned in a fire. They say he killed his first wife. They say his estate is a fortress in the wastelands, where screams echo and servants disappear. Alara had heard them all. 3 days ago, when her father had dragged her into his study by her wrist and informed her, not asked, informed, that she would marry the Duke of Thornwick in exchange for £40,000 and the erasure of his gambling debts, she'd thought the rumors must be exaggerations. But then she'd seen her father's face. The relief in his eyes that someone, anyone, would take her off his hands. The way he'd counted the bank draft twice, 3 times, as if the numbers might change. "Father, please," she'd begged. "I'll find work. His hand had cracked across her face. "You'll do your duty, girl. You're 20 years old, plain as paste, and utterly useless. This is the only value you've ever had." Her stepmother had smiled from the corner. The Duke must be truly desperate to take damaged goods. Now, as Mary finished the last button, Alara studied her reflection. 20 years old. Brown hair that never held a curl the way her stepsister's blonde ringlets did. Gray eyes too serious, too watchful, the eyes of someone who'd learned to calculate the distance to the nearest exit. A face her father called unremarkable, and her stepmother called sallow, but alive. For now. "It's time, miss," Mary said softly, genuine pity in her voice. Downstairs, Alara could hear the carriage horses stamping, the murmur of the few guests her father had assembled. Mostly creditors, witnesses to ensure the transaction was legal and binding. Her stepsisters, Caroline and Beatrice, stood at the bottom of the stairs in their pastel gowns, whispering behind gloved hands. They fell silent as Alara descended, their eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "Do try not to embarrass us by fainting at the altar," Caroline said sweetly. Father paid good money for this. Though I suppose the beast won't mind if you're unconscious, Beatrice added with a giggle. Might prefer it, actually. Their mother appeared, adjusting her elaborate hat. Girls, don't tease. She turned to Elara with a cold smile. You should be grateful, Elara. Most girls in your unfortunate position would be cast out entirely. The Duke was quite generous. Generous. The word tasted like ash. Her father emerged from his study, smelling of brandy though it was barely noon. He looked her up and down with the same expression he'd worn when selling off the family horses. Assessing value, calculating loss. You'll do, he said curtly. The carriage is waiting. Don't embarrass me. No embrace. No farewell. No acknowledgement that he was sending his daughter to a man rumored to be a monster. Just, don't embarrass me. The church was small, cold, and nearly empty. Elara walked down the aisle on her father's arm, his grip bruisingly tight, as if afraid she might bolt. The pews held perhaps a dozen people. Her stepmother and stepsisters in the front row, the Duke's solicitor with his leather case of documents, and a handful of her father's associates who'd come to witness the spectacle. No one from Elara's side. No childhood friends. She'd never been allowed to have them. No distant relations, they'd all cut ties with her father years ago. No fairy godmother to sweep in and save her. Just the steady click of her shoes on stone, and the altar looming ahead like an executioner's block. And at the altar, waiting in absolute stillness, stood the beast. Elara's breath caught. He was tall, well over 6 feet, dressed in an immaculate black morning coat that seemed to drink in what little light filtered through the stained glass windows. But his face was completely hidden. A black silk mask covered him from forehead to jaw, with only narrow slits for his eyes. Over that, a fine black veil hung from his top hat, obscuring even those glimpses of humanity. His hands were gloved in black leather, not an inch of skin visible. He looked like death himself come to claim a bride. Elara's father thrust her forward the last few steps, then practically fled to his pew. She stood alone before the beast, her bouquet of white roses trembling in her hands. The vicar cleared his throat nervously and began the ceremony. His voice seemed to come from very far away, the words blurring together. Dearly beloved, gathered here, holy matrimony. Elara forced herself to look up at her husband-to-be. Through the veil, she could just barely make out the shape of his eyes watching her. Dark eyes. Unreadable. Was he horrified by what he saw? Disappointed by the plain, frightened girl he'd purchased? Do you, Caelan Rothwell Thornwick, Duke of Thornwick, take this woman? I do. His voice was low, rough, as if unused to speech. It sent a shiver down her spine. And do you, Elara Catherine Ashford, take this man? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. From the pews, her father's sharp whisper, answer him. The beast, Caelan, remained utterly still, waiting. His gloved hands hung at his sides, making no move to force or threaten. Elara thought of her father's house. The locked doors, the meals withheld as punishment, the endless years of being told she was worthless, stupid, ugly, a burden. She thought of the rumors he killed his first wife, and she thought, at least it will be quick. I do, she whispered. The vicar relaxed visibly. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the... That won't be necessary, the beast said quietly. His accent was refined, cultured, a gentleman's voice trapped behind that terrible mask. He turned to the vicar, produced a ring from his waistcoat pocket. A simple gold band, elegant and understated. As he reached for Elara's hand, she flinched. He froze. Through the veil, those dark eyes met hers. And for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw something in them. Not cruelty, not hunger, pain. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he took her left hand in his gloved one. His touch was gentle, far gentler than her father's had ever been. He slid the ring onto her finger with surprising care, his hand trembling slightly. Was he nervous? Could monsters be nervous? "It's done," her father announced loudly, already standing. "The documents, if you please." The Duke's solicitor stepped forward with frightening efficiency. Papers were signed, witnessed, notarized. Money changed hands. She watched her father count the bank draft with greedy fingers, not even glancing at his daughter. "Pleasure doing business," her father said to the solicitor, not even looking at the Duke, not looking at Alara. Her stepmother gathered her daughters. "Come along, girls. We have that luncheon at Lady Hartwell's." Caroline paused just long enough to whisper as she passed, "Do try to survive the wedding night. I've a bet with Beatrice on how long you'll last." Then they were gone. All of them, sweeping out of the church in a rustle of silk and satisfaction, leaving Alara standing beside her new husband in the echoing silence. The vicar had already retreated to the vestry. The solicitor was packing his case, and Alara was alone with the beast. "Come." That low, rough voice. He offered his arm, formal as any gentleman at a ball. She stared at it, at the black leather glove, at the strong forearm beneath the expensive fabric. This is the moment, she thought. This is when the nightmare truly begins. But she had nowhere else to go. No home to return to, no family who wanted her. So she placed her hand on his arm, and was shocked to feel how solid, how warm he was beneath the layers of fabric and leather. Real, human. He led her out of the church into the gray morning. A carriage waited at the curb, black as morning, pulled by 4 massive horses. The Thornwick crest was emblazoned on the door. A wolf's head, silver on black. The solicitor held the door. The Duke handed her up, his grip firm but careful, making sure she didn't stumble on her gown. She settled onto the velvet seat, her heart hammering. The Duke climbed in after her, filling the small space with his height and presence. He took the seat directly across from her, not beside her, keeping his distance. The solicitor shut the door with a decisive click. The driver's whip cracked, and the carriage lurched forward, carrying Alara away from the only life she'd ever known, however terrible, and into the complete unknown. She dared a glance at her husband. He sat perfectly still, hands resting on his knees, masked face turned slightly toward the window, silent as a statue. The carriage rolled through London streets, heading north, toward the wastelands, toward the fortress estate where screams supposedly echoed, toward whatever fate awaited her. Alara pressed her back against the seat and tried to still her trembling hands. She was married to the beast of the north. And God help her, she had no idea if she would survive to see morning. The carriage rattled north through England's countryside, each mile taking Alara further from everything she'd ever known. 3 days, the solicitor had said. 3 days to reach Thornwick Manor in the northernmost reaches of Yorkshire. 3 days trapped in this confined space with a man who hadn't spoken a single word since leaving London. The beast sat across from her in perfect stillness, his masked face turned toward the window. Rain had begun to fall, streaking the glass, casting shifting shadows across the black silk that concealed him. Alara couldn't tell if he was watching the landscape or watching her reflection in the glass. Her corset felt impossibly tight. The wedding dress seemed to constrict with each breath. She wanted to ask if they could stop, if she could change into something less suffocating. But the silence in the carriage was so complete that speaking felt like it would shatter something dangerous. Hours passed. The city gave way to villages, then to rolling hills, then to increasingly wild country. The rain intensified, drumming on the carriage roof like frantic fingers. Finally, as afternoon faded toward evening, the carriage slowed and stopped at a posting inn. Alara's heart leaped, a reprieve however brief. The Duke rose smoothly, his head nearly brushing the carriage ceiling. He opened the door himself before the footman could reach it, then turned to her and offered his gloved hand. Alara hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, careful, as he helped her down into the muddy courtyard. Rain immediately soaked her dress, but she was too grateful to be out of that suffocating box to care. "Wait here," he said, only the second complete sentence he'd spoken to her. Then he strode into the inn, his dark figure cutting through the rain like a blade. Alara stood beneath the eaves, shivering, until he emerged minutes later. He didn't speak, simply gestured for her to follow. Inside, the innkeeper's wife led them upstairs. The woman kept shooting nervous glances at the Duke's masked face, her keys rattling in her shaking hands. "Here's your rooms, Your Grace," she said, opening 2 doors across the hall from each other. "Supper will be brought up shortly." 2 rooms, not 1. The Duke nodded curtly. The woman fled. Alara stood in the hallway, uncertain. Was she supposed to go to her room? To his? What did he expect? "You should rest," he said quietly, still not looking at her. "We leave at dawn." Then he entered his room and closed the door, leaving Alara alone in the dim hallway. She waited, barely breathing, for the door to reopen, for him to summon her, for the nightmare to truly begin. But nothing happened. Eventually, she slipped into her own room. It was small but clean, with a fire already burning in the grate. On the bed lay a traveling dress, simple, warm, practical, suitable for a long journey. When had he arranged for this? A knock startled her. She opened the door to find a maid with a tray, hot soup, fresh bread, tea. "Compliments of His Grace, ma'am. He asked what you might prefer, and I said most ladies like a good broth after travel." Alara stared at the tray, at the steam rising from the bowl. "He asked." "Aye, ma'am. Very particular about your comfort, he was." The maid bobbed a curtsy and hurried away. Alara closed the door slowly, looking at the food. The warm room, the thoughtful dress laid out for tomorrow. This didn't feel like the actions of a monster preparing to torture his captive bride. But then, what did she know of monsters? Perhaps they fed their victims well before the slaughter. She ate the soup because she was starving. Her family hadn't bothered with a wedding breakfast. Then she changed out of the hateful wedding dress, pulled on the nightgown provided, and climbed into bed. The door remained closed all night. In the morning, she found a note slipped under her door. "Take your time. We leave when you're ready." When she emerged dressed in the traveling clothes, she found him waiting by the carriage. He handed her up without a word, ensuring she was settled with blankets despite the fact that the rain had stopped and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. The second day passed much like the first. Silence, stillness, but also small things. When they stopped to change horses, he purchased hot cider and handed it to her without comment. When the road became rough, she heard him knock on the roof and the carriage slowed, gentling the ride. That night, another inn, another 2 rooms, another tray of food chosen specifically to her taste. How did he know she preferred chicken to beef? The third day they entered the wild moorlands. The landscape grew increasingly desolate. Rolling hills of heather and gorse, rocky outcroppings, distant mountains shrouded in mist. Civilization fell away until there was nothing but wilderness and wind. Alara watched the Duke's reflection in the rain-streaked glass. He sat so still, so controlled. But she'd begun to notice small things. The way his hands occasionally clenched on his knees, then deliberately relaxed. The way his shoulders carried tension like a man expecting a blow. He was afraid, she realized with a shock. The beast of the north, the monster of legend, was terrified. But of what? As sunset approached on the third day, the carriage crested a hill and Alara gasped. There, in the valley below, stood Thornwick Manor. It wasn't the crumbling Gothic ruin she'd imagined. It was a fortress, gray stone walls rising from the moorland like something carved from the bones of the earth itself. Towers and battlements, narrow windows, a single arched entrance. Ancient, imposing, isolated. No other houses in sight. No village lights twinkling in the distance. Just the manor, alone against the darkening sky. The carriage descended into the valley. The horses' hooves clattered over a stone bridge spanning a rushing stream. The iron gates stood open, waiting. As they passed through, Alara felt them close behind her. Not with a clang, but with a soft, final click. The carriage stopped before the entrance. The Duke rose and opened the door, stepping out into the gathering twilight. He turned, offered his hand one more time. Alara took it and stepped down onto the cobblestones of her new home. A prison of stone. A fortress against the world. And somewhere within these walls, she would learn what kind of monster had bought her. The Beast of the North led his bride into Thornwick Manor, and the door closed behind them with the weight of a tomb. The entrance hall of Thornwick Manor was not what Alara expected. Where she'd imagined dust and decay, there was instead spotless stone and polished wood. Candles burned in wall sconces, casting warm light over tapestries depicting northern landscapes. Moors and mountains, storm-tossed seas. The air smelled of beeswax and lavender, not mildew and death. A woman emerged from a side corridor, elderly, sharp-eyed, dressed in the severe black of a housekeeper. She curtsied to the Duke, then turned her assessing gaze on Alara. "Mrs. Greaves," the Duke said, his rough voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "This is the Duchess. Please show her to her chambers." "Your Grace." Mrs. Greaves's tone was respectful but not servile. She'd clearly been in service here long enough to fear nothing. "Welcome to Thornwick, my lady. If you'll follow me?" Alara glanced at the Duke. He stood perfectly still, that masked face revealing nothing. Waiting for her to leave him, it seemed. "Come along, ma'am," Mrs. Greaves said, not unkindly. "You must be exhausted from your journey." Alara followed the housekeeper up a wide stone staircase, through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced Thornwick ancestors. The manor was larger than it appeared from outside, a warren of passages and chambers, all immaculately maintained. Mrs. Greaves stopped before a heavy oak door. "Your chambers, my lady." She pushed it open, and Alara stepped through. The suite was magnificent. A sitting room with a cheerful fire already burning, comfortable chairs, and her breath caught, an entire wall of bookshelves, filled with books, hundreds of them. Through an archway, she glimpsed the bedroom. A massive four-poster bed with burgundy curtains, more tapestries, another fireplace. Warm, safe, nothing like the cold cell she'd imagined. "The Duke had these rooms prepared specially," Mrs. Greaves said, watching Alara's reaction. "He was very particular about the books. Asked what subjects a young lady of intellect might enjoy." Alara moved closer to the shelves, running her fingers over the spines. Philosophy, science, literature in 3 languages. Her father had forbidden her from wasting time on books, had locked away what few volumes she'd managed to acquire. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. Mrs. Greaves's expression softened. "His Grace values learning, my lady, and he wished you to be comfortable." She moved toward the bedroom. "Your trunks will arrive tomorrow, but we've provided a wardrobe for tonight. Supper will be at 8, if you wish to join His Grace in the dining room. Or I can have a tray brought here." Alara didn't know what she wanted. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and deeply confused. "Here, please, if that's acceptable." "Of course, my lady." Mrs. Greaves paused at the door. "Thornwick can seem forbidding at first, but it grows on a person. You're safe here. His Grace sees to that." Then she was gone, leaving Alara alone with the books and the firelight and the creeping realization that nothing about this place matched the rumors. The days began to settle into a pattern that felt surreal in its gentleness. Alara woke each morning to find breakfast waiting in her sitting room. Fresh bread, eggs, tea prepared exactly to her preference. How the kitchen knew she preferred honey to sugar remained a mystery. She spent her mornings exploring the manor. It was vast, dozens of rooms, many closed and dusty, but the main areas well kept. She discovered a music room with a pianoforte, a conservatory filled with winter-blooming plants, a gallery of artwork, and everywhere, servants who nodded politely but asked no questions. The Duke himself remained largely absent. She glimpsed him occasionally, a tall figure disappearing around corners, or standing at distant windows looking out over the moors. He never approached, never spoke except at dinner. Dinner was the only time she saw him properly, and even then, he sat at the far end of an absurdly long table, masked and veiled, speaking only the bare minimum of polite conversation. "Are your rooms satisfactory?" "Yes. Thank you. Is there anything you require?" "No. Everything is generous." Silence, broken only by cutlery on china. He never removed the mask, never touched his food until she'd looked away. She realized he was eating somehow, in the moments when she focused on her own plate, but the mechanics remained hidden. A week passed. Then too, Alara felt like a ghost haunting the manor, neither prisoner nor guest, existing in some strange limbo. She took to spending hours in her library, devouring books she'd never been allowed to read. Philosophy, poetry, scientific treatises. She was working through a particularly dense volume on astronomy when a knock startled her from her reading. Mrs. Greaves entered with a tea tray. "Thought you might like refreshment, my lady. You've been reading since breakfast." "I lost track of time." Alara closed the book guiltily, as if expecting to be punished. The housekeeper set down the tray, glancing at the title. Advanced Celestial Mechanics. Heavy reading for tea time. But her tone held approval, not mockery. "I suppose it is." Alara poured tea with hands that shook slightly. "Mrs. Greaves, may I ask you something?" "Of course, my lady." "Why does he hide?" The question tumbled out. "The Duke. Why the mask, the distance? Is he truly disfigured? Or is there something worse?" Mrs. Greaves was quiet for a long moment. "It's not my place to tell you His Grace's story, my lady. But I can tell you this, there's no cruelty in him. He's been master here for 12 years, and never once has he raised his voice to a servant or acted with anything but fairness. The people in the village call him the Beast, but they're also the first to go to him when they need help, and he's never refused them." "Then why?" "The world hurt him, my lady, badly, and he learned to protect himself the only way he knew how." Mrs. Greaves moved toward the door. "Perhaps someone patient and kind could teach him there's another way." After she left, Alara sat staring at her books, thinking about masks. The silk ones that covered faces, and the invisible ones people wore to survive. That evening at dinner, she tried something different. Instead of responding to the Duke's polite questions with equally polite monosyllables, she asked her own. "The book on celestial mechanics in my library, is it from your collection?" He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. How he managed to eat through a veil remained a mystery. "Yes, I studied astronomy at Cambridge." "What drew you to it?" Another pause, as if no one had ever asked him such a question. "The precision, the predictability. Stars follow immutable laws. They don't change their nature based on appearance or reputation." There was something raw in those words, something unguarded. "I've always been fascinated by the idea that we're all made of stardust," Alara said softly. "That the iron in our blood comes from exploded stars. It makes all the surface differences seem rather trivial." Through the veil, she felt his eyes on her. Really on her, perhaps for the first time. "You've studied chemistry," he said. "Not a question. When I could. My father considered education for women a waste of resources, but I borrowed books when he wasn't looking." Borrowed. Stole, technically. She waited for censure. Instead, she heard something impossible. A soft sound that might have been a laugh. "What other crimes have you committed, Duchess?" Once I sneaked into a public lecture on evolutionary theory. Dressed as a boy. The constable nearly caught me. Evolutionary theory. His voice had lost some of its careful distance. What did you think of Darwin's proposals? And suddenly they were talking, really talking. About science, about books, about ideas. The conversation flowed like water finding its course. And for an hour Alara forgot to be afraid. Forgot to wonder about the face behind the mask. She only remembered when the clock struck 9 and the Duke rose abruptly. "You should rest," he said, the warmth draining from his voice. "Good night, Duchess." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone at the absurdly long table, wondering if she'd imagined the brief connection. The next morning, Alara found something waiting on her breakfast tray. A small brass key and a note in elegant handwriting. "The library on the second floor is more extensive than the one in your chambers. It's yours should you wish it." Her heart performed a strange flutter. She'd seen the massive double doors on the second floor but assumed they were locked, off limits. She went immediately after breakfast, key clutched in her hand. The library was breathtaking. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves, a spiral staircase leading to a gallery level, tall windows overlooking the moors. Thousands of books, organized with meticulous care. Comfortable chairs, writing desks, a fireplace already burning. Alara stood in the center of the room and felt tears prick her eyes. This was freedom, knowledge, everything her father had denied her, offered without conditions by the man everyone called a monster. She was examining a first edition of Newton's Principia when she heard a soft sound behind her. The Duke stood in the doorway, still masked, but something in his posture suggested uncertainty. "Do you like it?" he asked, and there was genuine anxiety in the question. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Alara said honestly. His shoulders relaxed infinitesimally. "I'm glad. I've always thought a mind like yours should never be starved. You don't even know my mind. I know you understood the dinner conversation about celestial mechanics better than half my Cambridge classmates would have. I know you risked punishment to educate yourself. That takes both intelligence and courage." He paused. "Both of which have been poorly rewarded in your life." How did he know that? Had he investigated her background beyond her father's debts? "Why?" she asked, gesturing to the library, to everything. "Why all this? The rooms, the books, the kindness? Why marry me at all if you plan to keep me at arm's length?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "Because I'm aware of what it's like to be treated as worthless. And I thought perhaps we could offer each other refuge." "Refuge from what?" "From a world that judges in absolutes." He turned toward the door. "Enjoy the library, Duchess. It's yours." And he was gone again, leaving Alara with 1,000 more questions and the beginnings of a dangerous thought. What if the beast wasn't the monster everyone believed? What if he was simply a man who'd been so badly hurt that he'd forgotten how to live without armor? And more dangerously still, what if she wanted to help him remember? Winter deepened over the moors, and with it, something shifted inside Thornwick Manor's stone walls. Alara had stopped taking meals in her chambers. Every evening, she went down to the dining room and slowly, painfully slowly, the distance between her chair and the Duke's shortened. 1 seat closer each week, until she was sitting near enough to speak without raising her voice. The conversations grew longer, richer. They debated philosophy over roasted pheasant, discussed poetry between courses, argued good-naturedly about scientific theories while dessert went cold. The Duke had a mind like a steel trap, quick, incisive, formidable. But more than that, he listened. When Alara spoke, he gave her his complete attention, never dismissing her ideas simply because she was young or female. When she challenged his positions, he engaged rather than retreating into masculine superiority. It was intoxicating. For 20 years, her father had told her that her thoughts were worthless. Her stepmother had mocked her pretensions to intelligence. And here was a man who actually wanted to hear what she thought about Kant's categorical imperative. "You're smiling," the Duke observed one evening, his rough voice carrying a note of curiosity. Alara startled, realizing she'd been lost in thought, a smile playing at her lips. "I was thinking that this is the most ridiculous marriage in England. Husband and wife who speak only of epistemology and never anything else. Would you prefer to speak of something else?" The question hung between them like a held breath. "I'd prefer to know you," Alara said quietly. "The real you, not just your opinions on empiricism." The Duke went very still. Then he rose abruptly from the table. "Good night, Duchess." And like that, the wall was back up. But the next evening he returned. And the evening after that. And gradually, between the philosophy and science, more personal truths began to emerge. Started small. Alara mentioned hating winter in London, the grey cold, the coal smoke. The Duke mentioned preferring the north because the isolation suits me. "Did you always prefer isolation?" she asked carefully. A long pause. "No. Once I enjoyed society. Before." "Before what?" But he'd already turned the conversation elsewhere, deflecting with a question about her childhood. She learned to read his deflections, to understand when she'd pushed too close to whatever wounds he carried. And in return, he learned to read her silences, the way she tensed when loud noises came from the hallway, the way she never sat with her back to a door. "Your father," he said one night, and it wasn't a question. Alara's hand tightened on her wine glass. "Was not a kind man. If he ever contacts you again, I'll ensure he regrets it." The cold fury in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Protection. When was the last time anyone had wanted to protect her? "He won't," she said. "He got what he wanted from me. £40,000 and the removal of an inconvenient daughter. You were never inconvenient. You are extraordinary." Alara looked up sharply, but the Duke had already turned his masked face away, as if regretting the words. A blizzard struck in early December, burying the moors under 3 feet of snow and trapping them utterly in isolation. No carriages could get through. No post could arrive. Just Thornwick Manor, cut off from the world. Alara found she didn't mind. She discovered the music room and spent hours at the pianoforte, playing pieces she'd learned in secret during her childhood. Her stepmother had considered musical education for her a waste of money, so Alara had taught herself by sneaking into the music room when the house was empty. She was midway through a Chopin nocturne when she realized she wasn't alone. The Duke stood in the doorway, utterly motionless. How long had he been there? "I'm sorry," Alara said, hands stilling on the keys. "I should have asked permission. Please don't stop." His voice was rough with something that might have been emotion. "I haven't heard music in this house since in many years." She hesitated, then began again. This time, she was acutely aware of his presence, of the way he moved to stand near the windows, his masked face turned toward her. When she finished, silence stretched between them. "You play beautifully," he said finally. "Who taught you?" "No one. I taught myself." He turned fully toward her. "That's remarkable. My stepmother would have said it was a waste of time. My father would have beaten me for touching the pianoforte." "Your father was a fool." The vehemence in his voice startled her. "To have a daughter like you and treat her as worthless." He stopped abruptly, hands clenching. "Forgive me. I shouldn't speak so." "Why not? It's true." Alara rose from the bench. "You're not the only one who knows what it is to be judged unfairly, to be called worthless for things beyond your control. What did they call you? Plain, sallow, graceless, too serious, too clever for a woman, as if intelligence were a deformity. Intelligence is never a deformity. And you're not." He stopped again, seeming to struggle with something. You're not any of those things they said. How would you know? You've never truly looked at me. The words came out sharper than she intended. But it was true, wasn't it? He kept himself hidden, but he also kept her at a distance, never really seeing her. I see you, he said quietly. More than you realize. Through a mask and a veil. Does the mask bother you? Yes, Elara said honestly. Not because I care what's beneath it, but because it's a wall between us. And I'm tired of walls. The Duke stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then, without a word, he turned and left the music room, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Elara sank back onto the piano bench, wondering if she'd just destroyed the fragile connection they'd built. But that evening, when she entered the dining room, she found him waiting. And for the first time, he wasn't at the far end of the table. He was in the chair beside hers. I thought, he said, his voice unsteady, that perhaps we'd tried formal distance long enough. Elara took her seat, her heart hammering. This close, she could see details she'd missed before. The breadth of his shoulders, the elegant movement of his gloved hands, the way he held himself with rigid control. Dinner was different that night. Intimate. No more shouting across the length of the table. Just quiet conversation. The occasional brush of a sleeve against her arm. The shared warmth of proximity. And when he laughed, actually laughed at something witty she'd said about Aristotle, the sound was rusty but genuine, and it hit her with the force of revelation. She was falling in love with her husband. The man everyone called a beast. The stranger who'd bought her like property. The masked figure who'd given her books and safety and the first real conversations of her life. She was falling in love, and she had no idea if he felt anything in return, or if she was simply another charitable project. A damaged woman he'd rescued out of pity. You're quiet, he observed. Just thinking. About you. About how your voice makes me feel safe. About how much I want to see your face. Not out of curiosity, but because I want to know every part of you. About how strange this all is, she said instead. A month ago, I thought I'd be dead by now. Killed by the beast of the north. His hands clenched on the table. I would never harm you. I hope you know that now. I do. She looked at him, at the masked profile turned slightly toward her. But I wonder, are you harming yourself? By hiding away here, alone. I'm not alone. You're here. Yes, I am. She gathered her courage. And I'd like to understand why you hide. Not the rumors or the gossip. The truth. For a long moment, she thought he'd deflect again. Change the subject. Retreat behind his walls. Instead, he spoke. When I was 8 years old, there was a fire. My younger sister was trapped in the nursery. I went in after her, got her out, but the roof collapsed. I was pulled free, but he touched the side of his mask. Half my face was burned. Badly. Alara's breath caught, but she didn't speak. Let him tell it. My father was horrified. Not grateful I'd saved my sister. Horrified that his heir was damaged, disfigured. He kept me hidden for years, told society I was ill. When I finally returned to social life, the stares, the whispers. His voice roughened. I was engaged once. Lady Catherine Pembroke. Beautiful, well-bred, perfect in every way. What happened? She saw my scars. The first time I removed the mask in her presence. His laugh was bitter. She called me grotesque. Said she'd rather die than marry a monster. The engagement was broken. The scandal was significant. So you came north. So I came north, where I could be useful to the people in the village without being subjected to their disgust. Where I could live without seeing that look in people's eyes, that flinch, that revulsion. I've never flinched from you, Elara said quietly. You've never seen me. Then show me. The words hung in the air between them like a dare. The Duke rose abruptly. It's late. You should rest. Kalen. She used his name for the first time and he froze. I'm not Lady Catherine. I'm not gonna run screaming because you're scarred. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She stood, moving closer. I know what it is to be judged for things you can't control. To be called worthless for not meeting someone else's arbitrary standards. I would never do that to you. His hands were shaking. She could see it even through the gloves. Please, she whispered. Let me see you. For an eternal moment he stood frozen. Then slowly his hands rose to the veil. He lifted it away, revealing the mask beneath. Black silk, covering him from forehead to jaw. His hands moved to the mask's edge. Are you certain? His voice was barely audible. I'm certain. He removed the mask. And Alara's first thought was, they called him a beast for this? The face before her was strong-featured and handsome. High cheekbones, a firm jaw, a well-shaped mouth currently pressed into a tense line. The left side was unmarred, the skin tanned from time spent outdoors. The right side bore the marks of the fire, scarring that traced from his temple down his cheek to his jaw. The skin texture altered but not grotesque. Not monstrous, just different. His eyes, deep brown, intelligent, and currently filled with something close to terror, watched her face for any sign of revulsion. Alara stepped closer, her gaze traveling over his features. Without thinking, she reached up. He flinched but didn't pull away as her fingertips gently touched his scarred cheek. The skin was smooth, slightly raised in places. Warm, real, human. This is what they call you a beast for? The words came out fierce, almost angry. This, he swallowed hard. It's worse in daylight. The scarring extends down my neck, my shoulder. I don't care. She cupped his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me, Kaelin. I have seen real monsters. I was raised by them. They had perfect faces and rotten souls. You, her voice broke slightly. You are the kindest man I have ever known. You gave me safety, books, freedom, respect. You've treated me like a person of value when my own family sold me like livestock. And you think I care about scars? Everyone cares. I'm not everyone. She held his gaze. And frankly, if Lady Catherine couldn't see past your appearance to the extraordinary man beneath, then she was a fool and you're well rid of her. Something shifted in his expression. Disbelief warring with desperate hope. You truly don't. He trailed off as if unable to finish the question. I truly don't, Alara confirmed. Then, softer, may I tell you what I see? He nodded, seeming incapable of speech. I see a man who saved his sister at 8 years old, which means you've been brave since childhood. I see someone who values knowledge and books and ideas. I see a duke who helps his tenants and never raises his voice to servants. I see someone who gave a frightened woman sanctuary and asked nothing in return. She smiled slightly. And yes, I see scars, but they're just part of you, like your height or your voice. They don't define you. My father said, his voice cracked. He said I was a disappointment, an embarrassment, that I'd never be worthy of the Thornwick name as long as I looked like this. Your father was wrong. Fierce certainty filled her. And cruel, and utterly blind to what he had. Kaelin's eyes glistened suspiciously. How can you stand there and say these things as if they're simple facts? Because they are. She lowered her hands but didn't step away. You asked me once if we could offer each other refuge from a world that judges in absolutes. I think we can offer each other more than that. We can offer each other truth. What truth? That we're both more than what others have called us. You're not a beast. I'm not worthless. And maybe, she gathered her courage. Maybe together we're something neither of us could be alone. The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Kaelin did something unexpected. He smiled, really smiled, not the careful half-expressions she'd glimpsed before. Despite the scarring, perhaps because of his obvious vulnerability, it transformed his face into something beautiful. Alara, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her given name. Would you? That is, I wonder if you might. He seemed to struggle with the words. Would you like to see more of the estate? Tomorrow, if the weather holds? I could show you the grounds, the village. We could walk together. It was such a simple request, but it felt monumental. An invitation to spend time together not out of obligation but because he wanted her company. I would like that very much. No mask. She understood what he was really asking. Can I trust you with this? With me? No mask, she confirmed. Unless you need it for your own comfort. But not for mine. He exhaled shakily. I haven't walked outside without a mask in 12 years. Then perhaps it's time. She smiled at him. The moors won't judge you. The wind doesn't care about scars. And neither do I. Something in his expression opened. A door unlocking after years of being sealed shut. I should warn you, he said. And there was a hint of teasing in his voice she'd never heard before. I'm told I'm quite dull company on long walks. I tend to lecture about geology and bore my companions senseless. I'm told I ask too many questions and have opinions on subjects ladies shouldn't discuss. I suspect we'll bore each other quite satisfactorily. His laugh, fuller and warmer than before, echoed through the dining room. Tomorrow then, after breakfast, dress warmly. The moors are beautiful but unforgiving. I'll be ready. He took her hand, raised it to his lips. Even through his glove, she felt the kiss like a brand. Thank you, Alara, for seeing me. Thank you for letting me. That night, Alara lay awake in her chambers, staring at the canopy above her bed. The books on the shelves seemed to glow in the firelight. All those volumes he'd chosen for her. All that careful attention to her interests and needs. She'd married a stranger 5 weeks ago. A man she'd been told was a monster. Instead, she'd found someone gentle and wounded, brilliant and kind. Someone who understood what it meant to be judged unfairly. Someone who'd given her more respect in a month than her family had in 20 years. And tonight, when he'd removed his mask, when she'd touched his face and seen the fear in his eyes, the terror that she'd recoil, that she'd confirm every cruel thing his father and society had ever said, something had crystallized inside her. This wasn't gratitude. It wasn't simple companionship. She was in love with Caelan Thornwick, Duke of Thornwick, the so-called Beast of the North. Completely, irrevocably, inconveniently in love. And she had no idea if he felt anything for her beyond pity for a woman who'd suffered as he had. No idea if this was the beginning of something real, or if she was simply another broken thing he'd taken in out of kindness. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow, she'd begin to find out. Outside, the wind howled across the moors, but inside Thornwick Manor, something warm and fragile was taking root. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The morning dawned clear and cold, the winter sun turning the snow-covered moors into a glittering expanse of white. Alara dressed in the warmest clothes she had, thick wool, practical boots, a fur-lined cloak Mrs. Greaves had laid out. When she descended to the breakfast room, her heart stuttered. Caelan stood by the window, looking out over the grounds. Unmasked. His profile turned toward the light, the scarring visible and somehow making him more real, more human than the mysterious figure he'd been before. He turned at her entrance, and she watched anxiety flicker across his features, as if even now he expected her to flinch. "Good morning," she said warmly. "The weather is beautiful." "It is." He moved toward the table, still watching her carefully. "Are you certain you want to walk? It's quite cold. I've been trapped indoors for 5 weeks. I'd walk in a blizzard at this point." His mouth quirked, almost a smile. "Then we'll walk." They ate breakfast together, conversation flowing easily now that the wall of the mask was gone. Alara found herself watching his expressions, fascinated by how much more she could read in his face. The slight crease between his brows when he was thinking. The way his eyes warmed when she made him laugh. After breakfast, They bundled into winter gear and stepped out into the brilliant morning. The cold hit like a physical force, but it was clean and sharp, nothing like London's dirty fog. The snow crunched under their boots as they walked toward the moors, and Alara tilted her face up to the weak winter sun, breathing deeply. "Freedom," she murmured. "Is that what this is?" Kalen's voice held something wistful. "Isn't it? No one watching, no one judging, just space and sky and silence." They walked side by side, their shoulders occasionally brushing. Kalen pointed out landmarks, the stream that ran through the valley, the rocky tor where he sometimes went to think, the distant mountains that marked the Scottish border. "It's beautiful," Alara said. "Wild, but beautiful. Most people find it desolate, unwelcoming. Most people are fools." She glanced at him. "I think I prefer it to drawing rooms full of people who smile while they judge you. You sound like you speak from experience." "My stepmother's social circle. Every tea was an exercise in veiled cruelty. They'd compliment your dress while implying it was last season's fashion. Praise your accomplishments while suggesting they were inadequate." She shook her head. "At least here, the landscape doesn't pretend to be something it's not." "No," Kalen agreed quietly. "It's honest. Harsh but honest." They climbed a gentle rise, and at the top, the full expanse of the moors spread before them, rolling hills of white stretching to the horizon, broken only by dark stone walls and the occasional stand of bare trees. "When I first came here," Kalen said, "I thought I'd go mad from the isolation, but gradually I realized this was the first place I'd ever felt I could breathe. No one staring, no one whispering, just peace." Alara understood exactly what he meant. "My father's house was full of people, but I've never felt so alone. Here, with just you and Mrs. Greaves and the servants, I feel less lonely than I ever did surrounded by family." He turned to look at her, his brown eyes serious. "Is that why you don't flinch anymore? When I move suddenly, or speak without warning? I've noticed you've stopped." She had stopped, she realized. The constant wariness that had been her armor for 20 years had gradually dissolved in Thornwick's halls. "You've never given me reason to flinch. You've never raised your voice, never made a threatening gesture. My body finally believes what my mind already knew. You won't hurt me." "Never," he said with fierce certainty. "I would cut off my own hand before I'd harm you." The intensity in his voice made her shiver, and not from cold. They walked on, and Kalen began to talk, really talk, in a way he hadn't before. He told her about his sister, Anna, who'd married a Scottish lord and lived in Edinburgh, about his mother, who'd died when he was 15, about Cambridge, where he'd buried himself in books and discovered he preferred equations to people. In turn, Alara shared her own story, not just the broad strokes of her family's cruelty, but the specific memories. The time she'd been locked in her room for 3 days for questioning her father's business decisions. The way her stepmother would serve her smaller portions at dinner, then mock her for being too thin. The constant message that she was unwanted, unnecessary, a burden to be endured. "I spent years trying to be invisible," she admitted, "trying to take up as little space as possible, to need nothing, to be no trouble. I thought if I could just be perfect enough, quiet enough, they might." She trailed off. "Love you," Kalen supplied gently. "Notice me, even just that. Just see me as human instead of an inconvenience." He stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "Alara, you are not an inconvenience. You are remarkable, brilliant, strong in ways I'm only beginning to understand. And anyone who couldn't see that was blind. So were the people who called you a beast. Perhaps we're both experts at recognizing blindness, then." He smiled slightly. "What a pair we make. Two people society discarded, finding each other in the wilderness. Is that what we are? A pair?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Kalen's expression grew serious. "I would like us to be. If you if that's something you might want. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure he must hear it. What exactly are you asking? I'm asking. He seemed to struggle for words. This marriage was a transaction. A rescue, perhaps, on both sides. But I find I want more than a business arrangement. I want. He took a breath. I want a real marriage. With you. If you'll have me. Have you? Alara's voice came out breathless. Kaylin, I've been half in love with you for weeks. Every conversation, every kindness, every moment you've treated me like a person of value. She stepped closer. Yes, I want a real marriage. I want you. The smile that broke across his face was incandescent. Truly. Though I warn you, I'm told I'm quite difficult. Too opinionated. Too bookish. He kissed her. It was tentative, careful, as if he feared she might startle away. But Alara leaned into it, her gloved hands coming up to cup his scarred face, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling. Too opinionated, too bookish? Kaylin repeated, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, terribly difficult. I'm doomed to a life of stimulating conversation and passionate debates. However will I survive? She laughed, and it felt like joy, pure, uncomplicated joy. When was the last time she'd laughed like this? They walked back to the manor hand in hand, talking and laughing, making plans. They'd write to his sister, invite her to visit. They'd gradually involve themselves more in the village together. They'd transform Thornwick from a hiding place into a home. That evening, for the first time, Kaylin came to her chambers after dinner. Not to her bedroom, not yet, but to her sitting room, where they sat by the fire reading aloud to each other until the candles burned low. And when he kissed her goodnight at her door, it was with the promise of more, of a future they'd build together, of a love that would grow in this wild, honest place. I never thought I'd thank my father for anything, Alara said softly. But selling me brought me here, to you. So perhaps some good came of it after all. He's still a bastard, Kaylin said firmly. Oh, absolutely. But I'm no longer his. I'm yours. And I'm yours, he replied. For as long as you'll have me. Forever, then. Forever. In the wild north, far from society's judgment, two broken people had found each other and begun to heal. The beast and his bride, learning that the truest monsters wore perfect faces, and the deepest beauty was found in scars honestly borne. And they were happy, for a while. The letter arrived on a gray morning in late February, delivered by a messenger who'd ridden 3 days through winter weather to reach Thornwick Manor. Alara was in the library with Kaylin, curled in an armchair while he read from a scientific journal, when Mrs. Greaves entered with the silver tray. Correspondence from London, Your Grace. Kaylin frowned, taking the letter. His expression darkened as he read. Damn! What is it? Alara asked, setting down her own book. He handed her the letter without a word. It was from her father's solicitor. Your Grace, it has come to our attention that certain parties have questioned the legitimacy of your marriage to Miss Alara Ashford, now Duchess of Thornwick. The timing of the union and the significant financial transaction involved have raised concerns about the validity of consent and proper procedure. To resolve these matters and preserve the reputation of both families, we request your attendance at the Fairmont Ball on March 15th, where you may publicly affirm the legitimacy of your union before London society. Your presence is most urgently required. Alara's hands tightened on the paper. They're calling our marriage a fraud. They're calling me a fraud, Kaylin said bitterly, suggesting I somehow coerced or purchased you improperly, that the marriage isn't real. He stood, pacing to the window. Your father is being investigated for fraud, isn't he? The timing of my payment, his debts, someone's asking questions. So he needs us to appear in public and prove the marriage is legitimate. Anger heated her chest. To save himself from consequences. We don't have to go. Kaylin turned to face her. Let him face the investigators. You owe him nothing. But Alara was thinking, if the marriage is declared invalid, what happens? You'd be. He stopped, understanding dawning in his eyes. You'd be sent back to your father's house. The annulment would dissolve any legal protection you have as my wife. Back to her father's house. Back to the locked doors and withheld meals and constant cruelty. Back to being property instead of a person. We have to go, she said quietly. Alara. Not for him. For us. For this. She gestured to the library, to Thornwick, to everything they'd built. I won't let them take this away. I won't let them send me back to that life. Kaelin crossed to her in 3 strides, taking her hands in his. I won't let them take you anywhere. But Alara, you know what gonna London means. Society. Stares. Whispers. People who've been waiting 12 years to see the beast and his bought bride. Let them stare. She met his eyes. Let them whisper. I don't care what they think anymore. I know the truth. That you're the best man I've ever known. That this marriage is real in every way that matters. And if we have to parade that truth in front of every gossip in London to protect it, then that's what we'll do. You're certain? Because once we walk into that ballroom, there's no hiding. They'll see my face. They'll judge you for being with me. Your family will be there, and they won't be kind. Good, Alara said fiercely. Let them see me happy. Let them see me with a man who treats me with respect and love. Let my father choke on his failure to break me. A slow smile spread across Kaelin's face. When did you become so fierce? When I married a man who taught me I was worth fighting for. She squeezed his hands. We'll go to London. We'll attend their ball. We'll prove the marriage is real. And then we'll come home, and they'll never touch us again. The journey south was the inverse of their wedding journey. Then, they'd been strangers riding in terrible silence. Now they talked constantly, planned strategy, supported each other through rising anxiety. Kaelin hadn't worn his mask since the day he'd removed it for Alara, but as they approached London's outskirts, she saw him reach for the bag where it was packed. Don't, she said gently. They'll stare. Let them. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Alara, you told me once that you'd lived 12 years hidden away, letting society dictate how you existed. Is that what you want? To go back to that? He lowered his hand from the bag. No, but I'm afraid for you. What they'll say about you for being seen with me. They've said worse about me already. That I'm plain, unmarriageable, an embarrassment. At least now they'll see I'm wanted. Loved. She took his hand. We walk in together, unmasked, and we show them exactly what we are. A couple who chose each other, who built something real. And if they can't handle that, it's their failing, not ours. They took rooms at a modest hotel. Kaelin refused to stay at his London townhouse, which held too many painful memories. The night before the ball, they lay awake late, talking strategy. Your father will try to separate us, Kaelin predicted. To speak to you alone, to manipulate you. He won't succeed. I'm not that frightened girl anymore. Your stepmother will spread rumors. She's probably already started. Let her. Truth is on our side. But beneath her brave words, Alara felt nerves flutter. She hadn't seen her family in 3 months. Hadn't faced the society that had always treated her as lesser. Part of her wanted to run back to Thornwick, to hide in their wild sanctuary. But she thought of Kaelin removing his mask for her, trusting her with his vulnerability. She thought of the man who'd been called a beast simply for bearing scars honestly earned. She could be brave for him. With him, they could be brave together. The night of the Fairmont ball arrived. Alara dressed in a gown Kaelin had commissioned. Deep blue silk that brought out her eyes, elegant without being ostentatious. Her hair was dressed simply. No jewels except her wedding ring. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she looked happy, confident, loved. When she descended to meet Kaelin in the hotel's parlor, His expression made her breath catch. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "So are you." And he was, dressed in formal black, his scarred face clean-shaven and unmasked. He looked every inch the powerful Duke, and every inch the man she loved. They took his carriage to Fairmont House. As they rolled through London streets, Alara felt her pulse quicken. But Kalen's hand found hers in the darkness, steady and sure. "Together?" he asked. "Together," she confirmed. The carriage stopped. The door opened. Music and light spilled from the mansion. Kalen stepped out first, then turned to hand Alara down. She took his arm, lifted her chin, and together they climbed the steps to face London society. The ballroom fell silent as they entered. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. The infamous beast of the North, unmasked for the first time in 12 years, standing with the bride society had assumed was either purchased or coerced. And they were smiling, happy, obviously undeniably in love. Alara heard the whispers start, a rising tide of shocked commentary. But she kept her eyes forward, her hand firm on Kalen's arm, and walked into the belly of the beast that was London society's judgment. Across the ballroom, she saw her father, her stepmother, her stepsisters. Their expressions of shock and fury were deeply satisfying. The war had begun. The whispers rolled through the ballroom like thunder. "That's the Duke of Thornwick. Hasn't been seen in society for years. The scars are quite. She doesn't look unhappy." Alara felt Kalen tense beside her, old instincts of self-protection warring with his determination to stand firm. She squeezed his arm gently, anchoring him. "Head high," she murmured. "They're just people. Fallible, judgmental people. Fallible, judgmental people who control your future if they declare our marriage invalid. Then we'll convince them otherwise." Lord Fairmont approached, their host for the evening, a portly man with calculating eyes who'd undoubtedly invited them for the spectacle. "Your Graces, how delightful you could attend. Please, enjoy the evening." Translation: "Please provide entertainment for my guests with your scandal." Kalen's jaw tightened, but Alara smiled sweetly. "How kind of you to include us, Lord Fairmont. Such a lovely ball." They moved into the room, and the crowd parted like water, people drawing back as if scarring might be contagious. Alara felt fury burn in her chest. These people, with their perfect faces and rotten souls, judging a man who'd saved his sister's life while they'd never risked anything. A hand suddenly gripped Alara's free arm. She turned to find her stepmother, resplendent in purple silk, wearing a smile sharp as knives. "Alara, darling, how surprising to see you, and looking so well." Her eyes flicked to Kalen with barely concealed disgust. "Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure." "Lady Ashford." Kalen's voice was ice. "I trust you're well." "Oh, quite. We've been so worried about dear Alara. Married so suddenly, whisked away to that isolated estate. One hears such stories." Her grip on Alara's arm tightened. "Perhaps we might speak privately, stepdaughter? I'm sure His Grace won't mind." It was a test, a way to separate them, to get Alara alone and work her manipulation. "I'm afraid I do mind," Kalen said smoothly. "My wife and I prefer to remain together this evening. I'm sure you understand." The emphasis on "my wife" was deliberate, and several nearby guests heard it. Lady Ashford's smile grew strained. "Of course. How devoted." She released Alara's arm. "Your father will want to speak with you both later. He has concerns about certain legal matters." "I'm certain he does," Alara said coolly. "Given his tendency toward fraud and debt, legal matters must be quite pressing." Her stepmother's face flushed. "How dare you?" "Excuse us," Kalen interrupted, already guiding Alara away. "We see some acquaintances we must greet." They moved deeper into the ballroom, and Alara felt a small victory. First skirmish won. But the real battle was just beginning. Her father found them near the refreshment table. Gerald Ashford looked older than Alara remembered, grayer, thinner, with the dissipated look of a man whose vices were catching up with him. But his eyes were the same, calculating, cold, devoid of paternal warmth. "Alara, Your Grace." He nodded to Kaelin with false respect. "Might I have a word with my daughter?" "No," Alara said simply. Her father's expression hardened. "I'm your father. You sold me to pay your gambling debts. That dissolved any paternal authority you might have claimed." Her voice was steady, drawing attention from nearby guests. "If you have something to say it in front of my husband." Gerald's face reddened. "You ungrateful girl. I gave you a home, raised you. You locked me in rooms, withheld food, and told me I was worthless for 20 years. Alara's voice rose slightly, and more people were definitely listening now. "Then you sold me like livestock to the first man willing to pay your debts. Forgive me if I don't feel particularly grateful." "Your Grace," Gerald turned to Kaelin, man to man, as if Alara hadn't spoken. "Surely you can see she's being emotional. Women often." "If you finish that sentence," Kaelin said quietly, "I will personally ensure every club in London knows the full extent of your financial crimes, and I will enjoy doing it." The menace in his voice was unmistakable. Gerald took a step back. "You can't threaten me." "I'm not threatening. I'm promising." Kaelin's scarred face was impassive, but his eyes were cold as winter. "You abused your daughter for years. You sold her to clear your debts without a moment's concern for her welfare. And now you want to use her again to save yourself from investigators. It ends tonight. The marriage is being questioned because you're under investigation and trying to create distractions. But I assure you, our marriage is entirely legitimate, consummated, real in every legal and personal sense. So whatever scheme you're running, leave us out of it." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "You expect society to believe you actually care for her? That this isn't just a business transaction? Look at her. Plain, awkward, nothing special. And look at you." His sneer was ugly. "A scarred recluse desperate enough to buy any woman willing to tolerate your face." The words landed like blows. Alara felt Kaelin stiffen beside her, old wounds reopening, and something inside her snapped. "How dare you?" she said, her voice ringing across the suddenly silent section of ballroom. "How dare you speak of him that way? This man, my husband, has more honor in his smallest finger than you have in your entire contemptible body." People were definitely staring now. The conversations around them had stopped. "Alara, lower your voice," her father hissed. "No, I'm done being quiet. I'm done letting you and people like you spread your poison." She turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "You want to know about our marriage? I'll tell you. I was sold by my father to settle his gambling debts. I expected to marry a monster. Instead, I found the kindest, most intelligent, most honorable man I've ever known." "Alara," Kaelin said softly, but she was beyond stopping. "My father locked me in rooms as punishment. My stepmother starved me to control me. They told me I was worthless every day of my life. And this man, the one you call a beast, he gave me books, freedom, respect. He treats me as an equal. He's never raised his voice or his hand to me. He risked his life as a child to save his sister and bears the scars for his courage." She turned back to her father, tears streaming down her face but her voice strong. "You want to know if our marriage is real? It's the only real thing I've ever had. He saved me, not from him but from you. From people like you who judge worth by appearance and measure value by social standing. So yes, our marriage is legitimate. More legitimate than anything you've ever done." The ballroom was completely silent. Her father's face was purple with rage. "You ungrateful! Enough!" Kaelin's voice cut through like a blade. He stepped forward, placing himself between Alara and her father. "You will never speak to my wife again. You will never contact her. If you attempt to do so, I will use every resource at my disposal to destroy what remains of your reputation and your fortune. Are we clear? You can't. I'm the Duke of Thornwick. I have more money, more power, and more friends in the House of Lords than you could ever imagine. Test me if you dare. Gerald Ashford looked at his daughter one last time, and Alara saw something flicker in his eyes. Not love or regret, just calculation. Recognition that she was no longer useful to him. Keep her, he spat. She was always more trouble than she was worth. He turned and stalked away through the silent crowd. Alara stood trembling, Kaelin's arm around her waist the only thing keeping her upright. She'd just publicly denounced her father, revealed family secrets, made a spectacle of herself. Everything a proper lady was never supposed to do, and she'd never felt more free in her life. The crowd remained frozen for one heartbeat. 2. Then Lady Pemberton, an elderly countess known for her acid tongue and social influence, began to clap. Slowly at first, then with genuine enthusiasm. "Well said, my dear," she announced loudly. "About time someone put Gerald Ashford in his place. The man's been a blight on decent society for years." Others joined the applause, tentatively at first, then more boldly. Not everyone, of course. Some guests still looked scandalized, whispering behind fans. But enough people were clapping that the tide had turned. Alara looked up at Kaelin, expecting to see anger or embarrassment at the scene she'd caused. Instead, his eyes were shining with something that looked like awe. "That," he said softly, "was the most magnificent thing I've ever witnessed. I probably shouldn't have. You were perfect. Fierce and honest and brave." He cupped her face with both hands, oblivious to the crowd. "I love you, Alara Thornwick. I've loved you for weeks, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid you'd married me out of desperation and would regret it eventually. But after that, you love me. Desperately. Completely. Forever if you'll have me." "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been terrified you only saw me as a charitable project." He kissed her, right there in the middle of the Fairmont ballroom, in front of 200 of London's elite. He kissed his wife with enough passion to make several elderly ladies gasp. When they finally broke apart, the applause had spread, mixed with some laughter and a few scandalized exclamations. Lord Fairmont appeared, looking thoroughly pleased with the evening's entertainment. "Your Graces, I believe you've more than satisfied any questions about the legitimacy of your union." His eyes twinkled. "In fact, I've never seen a more obvious love match. Anyone who claims otherwise is either blind or a fool. Both, in some cases," Lady Pemberton added, joining them. "My dear girl, that was splendid. Gerald Ashford has been terrorizing his family for years. High time someone called him out." She turned to Kaelin. "And you, Your Grace, I've known you since you were a boy. Your father was a pompous ass who cared more about appearances than character. I'm delighted to see you've chosen better." Other guests began to approach, some genuinely warm, others opportunistically shifting their allegiance now that the wind had changed. Kaelin handled them all with grace, his arm protectively around Alara's waist. As midnight approached, he leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Shall we make our escape? I believe we've performed sufficiently for London society." "Please," she murmured back. "I want to go home." "To the hotel?" "No. Home. Thornwick. The moors. Our library." His smile was brilliant. "Nothing would make me happier." They made their farewells to Lord Fairmont, nodded politely to Lady Pemberton, and walked out of the ballroom together. Behind them, the whispers started again. But this time, the tone was different. Not scandal, but romance. Not judgment, but appreciation. The beast and his bride. The reclusive duke and the woman brave enough to love him. In the carriage back to the hotel, Alara collapsed against Kaelin's shoulder, exhausted but exhilarated. "I can't believe I did that," she said. publicly denounced my father, declared my love, kissed you in front of everyone. You were extraordinary. I broke every rule of proper behavior. Good. Those rules were designed by small-minded people to keep others small. He kissed the top of her head. You, my love, are not small. You're magnificent. They left for Thornwick the next morning, not waiting for any social calls or follow-up. The gossips could gossip. The judges could judge. Mr. and Mrs. Beast were going home. The journey north felt different this time. Not flight but choice. Not exile but homecoming. They stopped at the same inns, but now they shared rooms, falling asleep in each other's arms, waking to whispered conversations and gentle touches. The walls between them had completely dissolved. When the carriage finally crested the hill overlooking Thornwick Manor 5 days later, Alara felt her heart swell. The gray stone fortress, the wild moors, the isolation that had once seemed threatening. It all looked like sanctuary now. Home, she whispered. Home, Kaelin agreed, squeezing her hand. Mrs. Greaves met them at the door, her usually stern face cracking into something approximating a smile. Your Graces, welcome back. I trust London was eventful. You have no idea, Alara said, laughing. They settled back into Thornwick's rhythms. Morning walks, afternoons in the library, dinners by the fire. But now there was an easiness between them, a physical comfort that had been absent before. Kaelin no longer kept his distance. He'd pull Alara into his lap while they read, kiss her in hallways, hold her hand constantly as if reassuring himself she was real. A week after their return, Alara found him in his study, staring at a letter. What is it? She asked. He looked up, expression complicated. A letter from Lady Pemberton. Apparently, our romantic display at the ball has made us the talk of London. Several young ladies have written to her saying they were inspired by your courage. And, he paused. 3 different gentlemen with visible scars or disabilities have written to me, saying that seeing me attend publicly, unmasked, gave them hope they might do the same. Alara moved to stand beside him, reading over his shoulder. The letters were genuine, heartfelt, thanking the Duke and Duchess of Thornwick for showing that love existed beyond society's narrow definitions of perfection. We've started something, she said softly. Is that good or bad? Good. Definitely good. She took his hand. We know what it's like to be judged unfairly. If we can help others feel less alone, why wouldn't we? Over the following weeks, more letters arrived. Invitations too, not to London society balls, but to smaller gatherings, charitable events, provincial assemblies. People who genuinely wanted their company, not their scandal. What do you think? Kaelin asked, holding an invitation to a literary society meeting in York. Shall we venture out occasionally? Or stay hidden here? Not hidden, Alara corrected. We're not hiding anymore, but selective. We choose where we go, who we see on our terms. On our terms, he repeated, liking the sound of it. Spring came to the moors in a wash of purple heather and green grass. Alara discovered she was pregnant in April, and Kaelin's joy was almost comical. He hovered, fussed, read every medical text in the library twice. I'm not made of glass. She laughed as he insisted she sit down after walking across the room. I know, but you're carrying something infinitely precious. Indulge me. She did because his protectiveness came from love, not control. Because he asked rather than demanded. Because when she said she was fine, he believed her. By summer, her belly was swelling noticeably, and they'd begun converting a room next to their chambers into a nursery. Kaelin painted the walls himself. A mural of the moors, complete with tiny details that made Alara cry with happiness. I want our child to know this place, he explained, to understand that beauty exists outside society's ballrooms. That strength comes from being true to yourself. Boy or girl? Alara asked, resting her hands on her stomach. Healthy, Kaylin said firmly. That's all I care about. They invited Kaylin's sister Anna to visit, and she arrived in August with her husband and 2 children. Watching Kaylin with his nieces and nephew, patient, playful, completely unmasked, Elara fell in love with him all over again. He's happy, Anna said one afternoon as they watched Kaylin teach the children to skip stones by the stream. I haven't seen him this happy since before the fire. You've given him back his life. He gave me mine, Elara replied. We saved each other. Anna squeezed her hand. That's the best kind of love. The kind that makes both people more than they were alone. In October, as leaves turned gold and the first frost touched the moors, Elara went into labor. It was long, nearly 20 hours and painful, but Kaylin stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, coaching her breathing, refusing to leave despite Mrs. Greaves's scandalized insistence that men didn't belong in birthing rooms. My wife wants me here, he said simply. So I'm staying. When their daughter finally arrived, healthy, red-faced, screaming with indignation at the world, Kaylin wept openly. She's perfect, he whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with infinite care. Elara, she's perfect. What should we name her? Elara asked, exhausted but deliriously happy. Kaylin looked at his daughter, then at his wife, then out the window at the wild moors beyond. Aurora, after the northern lights, because she's our light in the darkness. Aurora Thornwick, Elara murmured. Perfect. A year later, Elara sat in the library nursing Aurora while Kaylin read aloud from a scientific journal. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the room, illuminating the books that lined every wall. Are you happy? Kaylin asked suddenly, lowering the journal. Elara looked up at him. Her husband, father of her child, the man who'd saved her from a life of cruelty and shown her what love could be. His scarred face was relaxed, content, no longer hidden behind masks or walls. Impossibly happy, she said honestly. Are you? More than I ever thought possible. He moved to sit beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, looking down at their sleeping daughter. I used to think happiness was something for other people, people who fit society's molds. I never imagined that the beast could have a fairy tale ending? He laughed softly. Something like that. You were never a beast, Elara said firmly. You were a good man who'd been badly hurt, and I was a woman who'd been told she was worthless. But together we're extraordinary, he finished. Outside, winter was settling over the moors again, but inside Thornwick Manor, warmth and love filled every room. The fortress that had once been a hiding place had become a home. The marriage that had started as a transaction had become a true partnership. And 2 people whom society had discarded had built a life more valuable than any fortune, more beautiful than any ballroom, more real than any fairy tale. The beast and his bride lived happily ever after, not because the world changed, but because they changed their world. And that made all the difference. The end. Dear viewer, what part of this journey touched your heart or surprised you today? If you'd enjoy more historical love stories filled with healing and hope, let me know below. Please like, subscribe, and share to help others find these stories too. Thank you for spending your precious time here. Your next beautiful story is waiting on the screen.